Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Chris Weidenbar, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is leading aircraftsman Matthew Dilks. We warmly welcome the family of Private Stanley Everard Stephens, whose story will be told shortly. We're honoured to acknowledge Air Commodore Sajjad Hussain Awan, Deputy Commandant of the Pakistan Air War College, and the accompanying delegation. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Queensland, and RSL Victoria, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During the ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family, visitors, and students on behalf of the following schools from New South Wales: Bilgola Plateau Public School and Gosford Public School. I invite you all to please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. Students, you may be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private Stanley Everard Stephens. Stanley Stephens was born in 1891, the eldest of two sons born to Harry and Effie Stephens of the Melbourne suburb of Richmond. The Stephens family moved to Darlinghurst when Stanley was young. After attending Double Bay State School and some involvement in naval cadets, he followed in his father's footsteps and worked as a journalist on the Farmer and Settler newspaper. Stephens was among the first Australians to enlist after Britain's declaration of war against Germany, joining the Australian Naval, Military and Expeditionary Force in Sydney in August 1914. The ANMEF was a separate military force from the Australian Imperial Force, raised with the sole purpose of dealing with the German colonies directly to Australia's north. Sailing for Rabaul later that month, Stephens participated in the capture of German New Guinea and spent the following 6 months at Madang before returning to Australia. He then tried to enlist in the AIF but was rejected on the basis of having contracted malaria. Meanwhile, Stanley Stephenson's younger brother, Percy, had enlisted, and his mother became the secretary of the 13th Battalion Comfort Fund. Stephens returned to the Farmer and Settler newspaper and spent most of 1915 travelling the state and writing stories associated with the Australian war effort. In October, Stephens went to Gilgandra to cover the story of the recruitment march that intended to march to the AIF training camps in Sydney, some 450 kilometres away. Stephens decided to join in and was one of the 26 men who set up from Gilgandra to the 10th of October on the long march towards Sydney. By the time the march ended later that month, Stephens held the temporary rank of Company Sergeant Major, and the AIF had secured 263 volunteers from the Central West. Stephens played an important role in promoting the march's activities, which put him in good stead with the military authorities in the following months. Instead of going overseas with the rest of the marchers, Stephens remained in Australia, where he attended a depot school for NCOs and underwent a period of training at Duntroon. After further training at Kiama Military Camp, Stephens finally left Australia for the training camps in England with a reinforcement group for the 13th Battalion in September 1916. Stephens finally got to France in December 1916. He had arrived too late to take part in the fighting on the Somme, but joined the 13th Battalion as it occupied British positions between the villages of Fleur and Gerdecourt. Here the Australians endured the coldest winter in Europe in well over 40 years. Stephens was wounded when the battalion was relieved from a position known as Grease Trench. He returned to the battalion around a week later and reverted to the rank of private. German troops soon abandoned their Somme defences and withdrew to a formidable series of defences in the Arras sector, known as the Hindenburg Line. The 13th Battalion took part in the advance that followed, skirmishing with German rearguards that aimed to delay the Australian advance. The Australians re-established contact with German troops near the village of Bullecourt, where on the 11th of April 1917, the 13th Battalion formed part of the 4th Division's attack on the Hindenburg Line. The battalion suffered exceptionally heavy casualties in a costly and unsuccessful action. Among them was Stanley Stephens, who was listed as missing in action in the days after the battle. Some eyewitnesses claim to have seen Stephens wounded in the right shoulder by a German shell, while others claim that they saw him being led away by the Germans as a prisoner of war. Neither story could be verified. Several months passed without any further news of Stephens' whereabouts, which led a court of inquiry to determine that Stanley Stephens had been killed in action on the 11th of April 1917. Aged 26 at the time of his death, Stephenson's body was never recovered from the battlefield. He is listed among the 10,738 Australians whose names are commemorated on the Australian National Memorial at Villers-Bretonneux in France. His name is also listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. Here's just one of the many stories of courage and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Stanley Everard Stephens, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them. Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening.